We've got some big breaking news in just the last couple of minutes here. The corrections officer and accused killer she's suspected of helping escape in Alabama are now in custody.
On 25th of June 2024, you engaged in sexual activity with a prisoner. The sentence on you is one of 15 months imprisonment.
Sergeant Megan Callahan died around 6:20 last night, just an hour after she was attacked by an inmate.
April 29th, 2022. An incarcerated murderer, Casey White, breaks out of prison with the help of Vicky White, a veteran corrections officer with no familial connection to him. But what began as an escape driven by their romantic relationship would soon spiral into a tragic turn of events. Here are the tragic fates of some female cops in male prisons.
What blood is on your coat?
I would assume that it's mine.
Okay. And why would your blood be on that coat?
Because she bit my finger pretty good and it was bleeding all over the place.
When you were formulating that plan, did it include getting that radio away from her? Because that would be her lifeline.
Yes.
So you thought, I'm going to kill her, I'm going to do it by strangling her, and I better be damn sure I get that radio away from her.
That's the vicious murderer of corrections officer Jaime Beanle, describing details of what exactly led him to kill her. And believe us when we tell you that these details will leave you shocked. On the night of January 29th, 2011, what should have been a routine shift for correctional officer Jaime Beanle turns into a tragedy. She was assigned to the chapel at Monroe Correctional Complex, responsible for overseeing religious programs. When her shift ended at 10 p.m., she failed to check in or even turn in her equipment. A few minutes earlier, a routine inmate count revealed that one prisoner was missing. And just like that, it became clear that something tragic must have happened. And before we get into these disturbing details, there's a couple things you need to know, starting with one inmate named Byron E. Scherf. Scherf was a repeat offender with a violent history that spanned decades. His criminal record began in 1978 when he was convicted of second-degree assault and sentenced to 10 years in prison. However, he was paroled just 2 years later, and when he got out, he escalated his crimes to shocking levels of brutality. While on parole, Scherf kidnapped a young waitress, took her to this abandoned house, tied her up, and raped her. In a horrifying act of cruelty, he doused her in gasoline, set her on fire, and left her to die. Miraculously, the victim survived by wriggling while still bound out of a second-story window. Scherf was convicted of the crime and sentenced to life in prison. Yet despite the severity of his actions, he was paroled again on December 30th, 1993. During his second parole, Scherf struck again. This time he posed as a potential homebuyer and lured a female real estate agent to a remote house. Once alone, he would abduct and sexually assault her. He was convicted once more and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He was housed at Monroe Correctional Complex, where he would serve his life sentence. And that's when he crossed paths with Beanle. 34-year-old Jaime Beanle was a hardworking correctional officer who had been with the Washington State Department of Corrections since 2002. Known for her dedication, she was Monroe's Officer of the Year in 2008, and even before joining law enforcement, she was a star athlete, bringing the same level of commitment and determination to her role in corrections. Now, despite her dedication, Beanle had expressed concerns about her safety. She repeatedly told her supervisors that she felt vulnerable being the only guard assigned to the chapel. This space is for religious activities, but it would allow inmates to gather in a setting with minimal security. Now, Beanle had spoken up several times about the risks of working alone without backup. A union spokesman confirmed that she had asked to be reassigned to another part of the prison due to these safety concerns. However, with ongoing budget cuts leading to reduced staff, officers were frequently forced to work solo in various areas of the prison, and unfortunately, this led to her death. Jamie's worst fears became a reality that night. She was found dead inside the prison chapel, strangled with a microphone cord. The inmate responsible, Byron E. Scherf, was discovered in the chapel lobby just minutes after the routine inmate count flagged him as missing. When confronted by officers, he lied that he had planned to escape before confessing that he had strangled her to death after fracturing the cartilage in her neck. His DNA was found on her fingernails, and his blood was found on her coat and the amplifier cord used to strangle her. Scherf was immediately placed in isolation with the segregation unit, and when questioned, he really had no tangible reason for killing her. Maybe he wanted to sexually assault her, but she was found with her clothes intact. He was initially sentenced to death, but it was later commuted to a life sentence.
Today, I am mandated to take back that sentence. The Supreme Court has spoken. You will not be punished for the killing of Jaime Beanle.
And let's just say that decision didn't sit well with many people.
Judge George Apple had no choice but to vacate Scherf's death sentence today and reinstate his original sentence of life without parole.
You do something minor, you have a minor consequence. You do something worse, you have a worse consequence. And now we're going up to the top of the pyramid and saying, at that point, there's no consequence at all. And I think that's upside down logic in terms of law and justice. And I think it doesn't serve victims or their families very well.
Linda D'Souza Abro, stand up. The sentence on you is one of 15 months imprisonment.
Oh, Linda D'Souza Abro. Where do we even begin? She's just a disgrace to the uniform, an abomination to everything law enforcement stands for. The filthiest, most corrupted, and utterly shameless excuse for a prison officer to ever set foot in a correctional facility. On January 6, 2025, 31-year-old Souza Abro was sentenced to 15 months in prison after being caught on camera engaging in sexual activities with an inmate. The incident, taking place at HMP Wandsworth Prison, was captured in an explicit video that later went viral across social media. And yeah, you've probably seen the video, haven't you? But anyways, if you haven't, the footage showed D'Souza Abro in full uniform having sex with an inmate identified as 36-year-old Linton Weirich, while her discarded prison-issued radio continued to transmit messages from colleagues in the background. Then another prisoner was present in the cell, filming the encounter using a contraband mobile phone while smoking some cannabis and repeating the words,
"This is how we roll in Wandsworth."
Rather than cracking down on the inmate's illegal phone and drug possession, D'Souza Abro not only turned a blind eye, she actively took part in the recording, engaging in multiple. The incident took place in June 2024, and within days, the footage spread like wildfire inside Wandsworth, passed around by inmates with contraband phones. But the real chaos began when the clips hit social media. Almost immediately, Abro calls the prison, casually telling them she's not going to be coming back to work. Then she books a flight to Portugal, but her getaway was cut short. Authorities grabbed her at Heathrow Airport while she was traveling with her father, and it was at that moment that the full extent of her relationship with the inmate came to light. Originally born in Venezuela but holding a Portuguese passport, D'Souza Abro is a married swinger and has a daughter with her husband. She has been featured on Channel 4's swinger show Open House, and obviously had an OnlyFans account where she shared explicit content. On the other hand, Weirich was convicted in April 2024 for a high-end burglary in Kensington after stealing a collection of designer handbags, jewelry, and a laptop totaling over $85,000 from a secured safe inside a luxury flat. Outside the prison, he had a partner who was 7 months pregnant at the time. And as anyone would react, the partner was so shocked by that explicit video that she had to be hospitalized. Further investigations revealed that this was not an isolated incident. D'Souza Abro admitted to having sex with the same inmate on a separate occasion. Plus, she was caught on her camera engaging in oral sex with Weirich on the same day the initial footage was recorded. Now, she claimed in her statement that she was so infatuated with Weirich that she actually wanted to pursue a serious relationship with him once he was released. I mean, talk about a prison romance gone wrong. But perhaps the most outrageous twist came when Abro, after her first arrest, tried to cry rape. She insisted she had only engaged in acts under duress, fearing for her safety, and alleged that she had been intimidated into compliance, believing refusal could lead to assault. However, the prosecution swiftly tore her story apart, calling it a complete fabrication. They pointed out that she had never once reported feeling threatened to prison authorities, and that her actions were anything but spontaneous, because she'd meticulously planned everything, ensuring that she'd be alone with the inmate, and even recruiting a second prisoner to serve as a lookout. Then, as media attention on the case exploded, Abro unexpectedly broke her silence. Not in defense, but to shut down impersonators. Despite keeping quiet throughout most of the legal proceedings, she takes to social media in the summer of 24 to call out people pretending to be her on OnlyFans and posting parody versions of that notorious video.
distasteful subject of OnlyFans creators impersonating and pretending to be me and recreating the scenario of said scandal which I am involved in. Very, very distasteful for you to monetize or advertise yourselves as me for OF content. It does interfere with my trial, but furthermore, it is incredibly distasteful.
Priorities, right? But anyway, she's now serving a 15-month sentence, and lucky for her, she's only expected to serve half of that time in custody, with the remaining portion under supervision. In all of London, she is shamed as the worst of the worst, a walking humiliation to law enforcement, and a stain that'll never be erased.
A veteran corrections officer apparently fell in love with an inmate and helped him escape with her so that the two of them could run off together.
The corrections officer that we mentioned, Vicky White, took her own life in Evansville when police arrived on the scene.
Vicky White, who had spent 16 years establishing herself as a model deputy in the Lauderdale County, Alabama Sheriff's Office, was widely commended by her community for her unwavering dedication and professionalism. However, what she does next would leave everyone in disbelief, as they try to understand how this respected officer could become romantically involved with a murder suspect incarcerated at the very jail where she worked. Even more incomprehensible was how she aided him in his escape, and together they evaded authorities for more than a week, traveling nearly 300 miles, before, tragically, she took her own life as the cops closed in. Like, you really can't make this shit up. The daring jailbreak and subsequent manhunt began on April 29, 2022, after Vicky White informed her colleagues about her plans to retire as the assistant director of the sheriff's office. Next, she claimed that she wanted to transport Casey White, with whom she had no familial relations, to a courthouse for a mental health evaluation. The footage captured by jail surveillance cameras shows the moment Vicky and Casey got into Vicky's patrol car. But in reality, no such evaluation had been arranged. Casey White, serving a 75-year sentence for attempted murder, among other charges, was also awaiting trial for the fatal stabbing of a woman in 2015. And jail protocol prohibits a correctional officer from leaving alone with a detainee. But this was just one of the lesser crimes they would eventually commit. Now, instead of going to the courthouse, the two lovebirds drive directly to a shopping center parking lot. Then they abandon the patrol car, climb into an orange 2007 Ford Edge, which had no license plates, and fled. As authorities realized the pair had gone missing, inmates at the Lauderdale County Jail came forward, claiming that the two had been romantically involved. Those allegations were independently confirmed, with investigators finding out that Vicky had recently sold her house at a significant loss. The Ford Edge was later discovered abandoned in Tennessee, and a tip led authorities to a car wash in Evansworth, Indiana, where surveillance picks up Casey White driving a 2006 Ford F-150 pickup truck. Again, the pickup truck is abandoned, and the infamous couple switch getaway vehicles to a gray Cadillac. Keep in mind, Vicky had been with the department for over a decade. She knew how to cover her tracks. If anyone could outsmart her colleagues, it was her, given her experience. But sometimes experience isn't enough. After 11 days on the run, authorities finally spotted the Cadillac at a hotel in Evansville, about 270 miles from Lauderdale County Jail. There, they saw Vicky wearing a wig, and as officers closed in, the couple attempts to flee. A short chase ensues, lasting about 15 minutes, before the Cadillac crashed. As officers approached the wreck, Casey White, who could face the death penalty if convicted, surrendered immediately. But Vicky, unable to face the disgrace of her actions, shot herself in the head. She was rushed to the hospital, but tragically passed away shortly after.
Lorraine Barwell was transferring a prisoner from a court to one of those vans. She was working with other custody officers, male and female, but she was suddenly attacked. She was left critically ill, and this morning police were told that she had died.
It's one thing for an officer to get killed in jail, but it's another to get brutally murdered in broad daylight, surrounded by fellow officers, just as we see in the case of Lorraine Barwell. June 29, 2015, 54-year-old Lorraine Barwell was tragically killed by 23-year-old Humphrey Burke, a prisoner she was escorting from court. That day, Burke was due at Blackfriars Crown Court for sentencing on charges of arson and attempted robbery. Once a law and philosophy student at Oxford Brookes University, Burke had dropped out in 2014 and soon found himself entangled in a life of crime, one that ultimately led to his imprisonment. Meanwhile, Mrs. Barwell had dedicated over a decade to Serco, the private security firm contracted by the Ministry of Justice to oversee court security. But despite her years of service to this firm, she became the first custody officer in the UK to be killed in the line of duty. Gia Sophocles, a new recruit on her very first day, was part of the team escorting Burke out of the court when the unthinkable happens. Despite having his hands cuffed behind his back, Burke suddenly steps back and unleashes a brutal kick on Barwell. According to Sophocles, the force of the strike knocked Barwell to the ground, causing her to let out a piercing scream. Then within seconds, he delivers a second, more powerful kick, one so forceful it was compared to striking a soccer ball with full strength. Barwell's head snapped backward violently, though it never made contact with the ground. 3 officers immediately rush in to restrain Burke, while emergency responders, including an air ambulance team, arrive at the scene to provide urgent medical care. Barwell was taken to the hospital in East London, but the damage had already been done. That vicious attack left her with a fractured jaw and a devastating brain hemorrhage. Tragically, despite medical efforts, she had succumbed to her injuries 2 days later. Now, what makes this even more unsettling is that Burke had previously exhibited erratic and bizarre behavior during past court appearances, faking collapses and going limp. On top of that, he'd already been diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia, meaning he should have been under stricter supervision. But perhaps the most disturbing aspect of it all, Burke was never formally charged with murder. Due to his mental illness, he was deemed unfit to stand trial. Instead, the court indefinitely committed him to a psychiatric hospital. However, if his condition improves in the future, he could still face a full murder trial.
Inmate Robert Lawrence Ransom Jr., a convicted killer from Los Angeles, was able to gain entry into a control booth similar to this one at the Sierra Conservation Center in Jamestown. Staffers say Ransom physically and sexually assaulted a female correctional officer.
I was strangled, I was held hostage at gunpoint, and I was raped multiple times.
January 20th, 2024. A catastrophic security breach at Sierra Conservation Center led to a brutal attack on correctional officer Katie Jackson. Due to multiple security failures, one deadly inmate, Emmy Ransom, gained unauthorized access to Facility C's control booth, where he held Jackson hostage at gunpoint for 4 agonizing hours. During this time, she was strangled, threatened, and raped, all while her fellow officers remained unaware of the ongoing attack. I mean, this occurred in broad daylight. So how exactly did Ransom pull that off? Well, the first thing you know is that Mrs. Jackson filed a lawsuit against California's Department of Corrections due to this attack, and according to the lawsuit, Ransom, previously convicted in 2018 for killing 2 women and attempting to kill a third in LA, had been sentenced to 85 years to life in prison. He was initially classified as a high-risk Level 4 inmate, before he was later reclassified and transferred to Sierra Conservation Center in Tulum County, a facility meant to house lower-risk offenders. Just weeks after his transfer, Ransom was assigned to work as a porter, which is a role for inmates involving cleaning and maintenance tasks. This position allowed him to familiarize himself with the prison's daily operations, including officer uniforms and shift changes. Leveraging that knowledge, he would hide inside a laundry basket and pose as a relief officer to gain entry to the control booth where Jackson was stationed. Once inside, he gained access to a loaded assault rifle and then used that to corner, kidnap, and brutally assault Mrs. Jackson, while he continuously threatened her, her colleagues, and her children if she didn't comply with his demands to smuggle contraband into the facility. And the reason why no one, not even a second corrections officer, knew about this abuse that stretched on for hours is because that control booth was poorly lit, making it difficult for anyone to see what was going on inside. Plus, the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation didn't notify correctional officers that an inmate as violent as Ransom had been transferred to their facility designed for lower-level offenders. And maybe, if more officers were on duty, Jackson wouldn't have been left alone in that control booth.
There were a lot of failed security measures within that institution that night, a lot of them, and it's heartbreaking.
As the title of this video suggests, this is the grim reality female officers face in male prisons. Thankfully, Kate Jackson survived, but the trauma is unimaginable. Ransom now faces 11 felony charges, including aggravated kidnapping and rape. However, justice after the fact feels like too little too late. The damage was done, and had Jackson not made it out alive, the outcome could have been even more devastating.
An officer's life is taken on the job. It is a job that is often dangerous and, as proved last night for Sergeant Megan Callahan, deadly.
On the night of April 26, 2017, Sergeant Megan Callahan rushed to put out a fire inside Bertie Correctional Institution, unaware that she was walking straight into a brutal ambush. Within minutes, she's attacked, beaten with the very fire extinguisher she had brought in to help, and left with fatal injuries that would eventually claim her life. But while that in itself is pretty horrifying enough to imagine, the real horror comes from the fact that this tragic incident could have been avoided. Her killer, Craig Wissink, was no stranger to violence. This guy was already serving life for a 2004 first-degree murder, and while behind bars, he racked up numerous infractions, including possessing an illegal drug, getting caught with a cell phone, and getting into altercations with fellow inmates and prison guards. But despite all those red flags, Wissink was transferred to medium custody, where inmates had more freedom and lived in dormitory-style housing rather than locked cells. And even there, he would continue to cause trouble. His disciplinary record led officials to move him up to maximum security in 2015, but a year later, he was returned to medium custody, despite the risks. Now, in the weeks leading up to Callahan's death, Wissink had warned prison officials that he was struggling with homicidal thoughts and needed mental health intervention. Yet, his warnings were ignored. Sergeant Callahan, on the other hand, had worked for the North Carolina Department of Public Safety since 2012 and had been promoted sergeant in 2016. At just 29, she had already earned the respect of her colleagues, taking on the challenge of working in one of the state's toughest prisons. She was dedicated, but also recognized the deep flaws within the system. A 2017 investigation showed that her unit was routinely understaffed, with untrained rookies often left to handle dangerous situations. The day she was killed, only 4 officers were on duty, half of what was considered necessary. 2 of them were near Callahan when she was attacked, but failed to step in. Both were recent hires, inexperienced and unprepared for the realities of prison life. Another officer remained in the control booth, while the only properly trained officer was stationed in another part of the facility. But how exactly did she die? Well, on the evening of April 26th, Callahan had written a disciplinary report against Wissink for failing to follow a direct order. About 30 minutes later, he set a fire inside a trash can, knowing it would force response. At approximately 5:30 p.m., Callahan arrives to put out the fire, unaware that Wissink had been waiting for the perfect moment to strike. As she tried to extinguish the flames, he threw boiling water onto her face. Stunned and in pain, she sets down the fire extinguisher, and Wissink attacks her with a piece of glass. When that failed, he grabs the fire extinguisher and begins bludgeoning her repeatedly in the head. Other officers either stood by or were too far away to intervene, and by the time emergency responders arrived, it was too late. Callahan's autopsy revealed the horrifying extent of her injuries. This poor woman suffered severe thermal burns to her face, chest, and left arm from the boiling water. The fatal blow, however, came from the relentless attack with the fire extinguisher, causing multiple lacerations, massive basilar skull fractures, and traumatic head injuries. The official cause of death would be traumatic head injuries due to assault with a fire extinguisher. As for Wissink, this guy was charged with murder in Callahan's death. Prosecutors sought the death penalty, arguing that his actions were calculated and brutal. But in September 2023, he was given life in prison without the possibility of parole, ensuring the taxpayers to keep paying for him. But at least he'll never harm another officer again. Back on May 15, 1981, a female corrections officer stationed at Greenhaven Correctional Facility vanished without a trace. and her body was never found within the prison. This marked an unprecedented event in New York's prison history, one shrouded in secrecy and unanswered questions. And even though it wouldn't be the last incident of its kind, the mystery surrounding this case remains unsolved to this day. At the time, Greenhaven was an all-male facility, home to some of New York's most dangerous criminals, men the state wanted behind bars for a very long time. The prison had gained a notorious reputation, not just for its inmates, but for the corruption that ran rampant amongst some of the guards, who've become entangled in these illicit activities alongside the criminals they were meant to oversee. But one officer stood apart, Donna Payne. Now, she was fiercely dedicated to her duty, refusing to be drawn into this corruption plaguing it. And some would even say her integrity may have ultimately cost her life. Now, shortly before her tragic end, Donna had a heated encounter with a male corrections officer. This confrontation exposed a network of corruption, implicating individuals in actions that could lead to both career-ending consequences and criminal charges. And honestly, by uncovering these hidden dealings, Payne really just made herself a significant threat. And for everyone else, that meant one thing: she had to be removed. On the day she went missing, Payne's shift was meant to run from 1 to 9 p.m. Her assignment for the afternoon was to patrol the prison yard. However, she received a phone call and told Correction Officer Claude King that she needed to handle an urgent matter. She left that prison yard and was last seen heading in the direction of the chaplain's office. By 6 p.m., when officers gathered for the next shift change, Donna had failed to report in as expected. Her absence was immediately noted, and officials had launched an urgent search. Every available correction officer scoured the facility, but 2 hours later, there was still no sign of her. At this point, it was clear that something was wrong. So the warden orders a full-scale lockdown, confining all inmates to their cells indefinitely. Throughout the night, search efforts intensified. A team of 200 personnel, including trained bloodhounds, was brought in to assist. The dogs pick up various scents throughout the prison, but for some reason, didn't search the chapel area. Suspicion had grown around 2 large dumpsters located outside the mess hall, which were frequently used to dispose of the prison's waste. So officers climb into the dumpsters thinking she might be in there, but no evidence related to Donna's disappearance. So on the following day, on May 16th, prison officials order a sanitation truck to empty the dumpsters for examination. And it was at this moment that a bulldozer operator made a grim discovery: human remains. Upon closer inspection, authorities identified the body as Donna Payne's, wrapped tightly inside 3 plastic bags. I mean, there was like 1,000 questions racing through everyone's mind at that moment. But all the answers pointed right back to one man: Lemuel Smith. Lemuel Smith is a convicted murderer with a long history of violence, including sexually assaulting women. Before his time at Greenhaven, he was incarcerated in Maryland for kidnapping a 25-year-old woman and brutally beating her within an inch of her life. His history of crime would also extend to correction officers, making him a known problem within the prison system. But as it turns out, he was working as the chaplain's assistant, a role that granted him increased access to various restricted areas within the prison. Authorities had their suspicions, maybe believing the call she got was someone trying to lure her into the chaplain's office under false pretenses, only to murder her off over there. A crucial breakthrough came when forensic experts examined the bite marks found on Donna's body and confirmed that those marks matched Lemuel Smith's unique dental pattern. So with his role within the prison combined with the proximity to the crime scene, it was pretty clear that he had been directly involved in her murder. Even though authorities believe he must have had an accomplice to dispose of her body without getting caught. But ultimately, Lemuel was found guilty of Donna Payne's murder and sentenced to death on June 10, 1983. After numerous appeals, he got life imprisonment. However, as a consequence of Donna Payne's murder and the continued threat he posed even behind bars, Lemuel spent the next 2 decades in near total isolation, one of the longest such confinements in U.S. history. And we know as of December 2022, he remains incarcerated at Wenda Correctional Facility, a max security prison in New York. Now, decades have passed since Donna Payne's murder, but there's still a huge mystery surrounding this case. Some say Lemuel was used as a mere scapegoat to protect others involved. But at the end of the day, when it comes to getting answers to those questions, I guess we'll never know. July 2016, at the French Robertson Unit, a max security prison located approximately 10 miles northeast of Abilene, 55-year-old corrections officer Mary Johnson was fatally attacked by an inmate assigned to work in the facility's kitchen. The person responsible would be 21-year-old Dillian Gage Compton, who was serving a 25-year sentence for a conviction in Dallas County stemming from a 2011 charge of aggravated sexual assault. Prior to that, at the age of 17, he was placed in the Clemens Unit's Youthful Offender Program in Brazoria County for some other crimes. So it's safe to say he's not new to the system, and even worse, this prison is one so deadly, even correction officers fear for their lives. The Robertson Unit, a facility designed to house approximately 3,000 male inmates, operates with a security staff of around 500 personnel. Given the high concentration of violent and high-risk offenders, including murderers, gang leaders, and repeat felons, the relatively small number of staff often find themselves overwhelmed. Many of these people work under constant tension, knowing that even a routine interaction could turn deadly in an instant. For Mary Johnson, her lifeless body was found around 3 a.m. near the prison's kitchen area. They tried to save her life, but it was too late, and she was taken to the Hendrick Medical Center, where she was later declared deceased. Now, Compton was transferred out of the Robinson Unit to a separate undisclosed max security facility, where he's going to be locked up in solitary for a very, very long time. If you're still curious about what happens to female cops in male prisons, look no further than the story of Joanne Hunter, a normal lady whose life got ruined the moment she fell for the manipulation of a charming inmate. We go to early 2019. Joanne Hunter first meets Connor Willis while working as a prison officer at HMP Forest Bank in Salford, England. Now, at first, she didn't think much of him. She even found him a little arrogant, overbearing, and prone to throwing his weight around. But over time, something changed. Despite her initial dislikes, she ended up growing closer to him, believing that he genuinely cared for her. She was young, inexperienced, and had never been in a serious relationship before, so she was a pretty easy target for manipulation. Before long, their connection evolved into something more. She admitted to kissing him and exchanging phone calls and messages, even sending explicit photos of herself. She would convince herself that what they had was real, that he really loved her, and that she needed to prove her loyalty. That's when she started smuggling in contraband into the prison. The request started small, packages that didn't seem suspicious. But soon, she was sneaking in cannabis, among other types of contraband. She would collect these packages from an unknown woman in a Tesco parking lot, and then take them inside and pass them on to another prisoner, a well-known figure within a crime gang, who would then ensure that they reached Willis. Though Willis offered her money, anywhere between £200 and £300 per package, she refused it because, to Hunter, it wasn't about the cash. She did it because she was in love. But all the while, the prison authorities were watching. By December 2020, they'd received intelligence about her activities. When they questioned her, Hunter, being her naive self, admitted to the relationship and smuggling items inside. They seized her phone and found all the photos to Willis, as well as messages asking about drugs, including that cannabis, some tobacco, maybe amphetamines. The prison said that her actions clearly undermined discipline and order within the facility, but had also led to an increase in criminal activity. When the case went to court, Hunter was described by her attorney as a vulnerable young lady who had been taken advantage of in her first job after finishing her studies. You see, she had a master's in childhood and youth studies, never been in a relationship before. But the judge, he saw things differently. He told her that she should have been an asset to the prison service, but instead she had chosen a selfish path. And for that, he sentenced her to 3 years in prison after she pled guilty to conspiracy to commit misconduct in public office and bringing cannabis into the prison.
Male inmate physically assaulted a female guard inside the Bridgeport Correctional Facility last week, sending her to the hospital. The spokesperson for the Department of Corrections tells us that she was conducting her routine duties when the inmate shoved her into a metal storage bin and attacked her.
Sometimes it's not just about the fact that a correctional officer is a female, it's also about the reputation in the place they work in. Take the Bridgeport Correctional Center, for example. On August 2, 2023, a female officer was viciously attacked by an inmate while performing her duties. If you're unfamiliar with Bridgeport Correctional, it houses male inmates, many of whom are awaiting trial. But make no mistake, just because they haven't been convicted yet doesn't make them any less dangerous. In fact, these inmates are so violent they reported more than a dozen attacks on correctional officers in 2023 alone. According to the DOC, the inmate grabbed the officer and sparked a physical struggle. He shoved her into a metal storage bin and struck her multiple times. Following that brutality, the officer was rushed to a nearby hospital. This wasn't a one-off either. That same month, in New York, another female correctional officer was subjected to extreme violence, this time at Rikers Island. Tamir Bay Foster, a 21-year-old detainee facing murder charges, launched a savage attack on an officer after getting upset that his cell door was locked. The assault left her unconscious, with many broken facial bones and a deep laceration requiring stitches. Prosecutors found that Bay Foster, in custody for a gang-related homicide, flew into a rage upon finding his cell door secured while he was outside. Protocol requires cell doors to remain locked whether an inmate is inside or outside, but this seemingly routine measure sets off a terrifying chain of events. Ignoring the officer's warning to calm down, Bay Foster allegedly began issuing threats, and in this attempt to control the situation, the officer deployed pepper spray, but it had no effect. In a violent outburst, he punched her with such force that her head slammed against the wall, knocking her out. Officers rushed in and managed to restrain him using additional pepper spray, but the damage had been done. She had suffered fractures to her orbital and sinus bones, as well as a deep facial wound beneath her eye that requires sutures. Bay Foster's attack was completely unprovoked, but it offers a stark glimpse into the kind of criminals housed at Rikers Island. A suspected member of the Money World gang, he was incarcerated on murder charges for allegedly planning and executing a fatal 2020 shooting. Investigators believed he mistakenly targeted his 26-year-old victim after wrongly assuming that the man had been involved in an earlier attack on a fellow gang member. Prisons like Rikers and Bridgeport are high pressure, demanding significant manpower to maintain order. Unfortunately, incidents like these show us how dangerous it can be for prison guards, especially female officers, for just simply doing their jobs.